Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I wrote about how long can you keep a critically ill patient in intensive care in an induced coma. You can check it out if you click on the link below this video in the written version of this blog. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another question of one of our readers whose husband is in intensive care after an induced coma but is off the ventilator now and is confused. So, Jelena from Toronto in Canada writes in, "Hi Patrick, my husband has had severe pneumonia and was on a breathing tube for several days and was heavily sedated in the ICU. His condition is improving and he had been taken off the ventilator. The issue is that although he has been off the ventilator and has now been awake for about 5 days, he's still very confused, agitated and not cooperative. The psychiatrists are medicating him with very strong medication, with antipsychosis medication to calm him down. He's not sleeping and he's not eating. In some moment he does recognize me and asks about our daughter. Other times he's not sure what's happening, is confused and mumbles a lot. I am curious why he's been given such strong medication. Can any of this medication be substituted? Is it normal that he's acting that way? How long can this last? Is there anything else I can do? Thank you." Hi Jelena, thank you for your email. I appreciate the time you are taking to write this email, and I understand the emotional pain and the frustration you are going through in this difficult and challenging time in your husband's and in your family's life. In order to answer your questions that relate to your husband's situation, there are a few things that can happen in intensive care after a prolonged induced coma. Waking up is very rarely linear or straightforward because of all the sedatives and opiates that have been given and accumulated during the induced coma in your loved one's body. Also, the body system needs to get rid of all the drugs and medications in the body system first, before your husband will make sense again. Furthermore, keep in mind that if your husband has been in intensive care with pneumonia, ventilated and in an induced coma, that he has been quite sick. Therefore, he has been weak and his health has just been compromised big time. The sickness and the induced coma are most likely causing the situation your loved one is in. The confusion, agitation and non-cooperation is often also triggered by the environment, with other people being in control, the sickness and just by simply everything that's going on in a busy intensive care unit. You must also know that a large percentage of ICU patients after an induced coma are not waking properly, and they are often not waking up as quick as you and the intensive care team would like them to wake up. But it's nothing unusual and it happens all the time in intensive care. Moreover, you don't say how old your husband is. However, generally speaking, the older patients are, the higher the risk and the likelihood that waking up after an induced coma is getting delayed and more difficult. Also, know that many ICU patients go through the ICU-related psychosis phase, just simply as a result of being in ICU, by being sick and by being on a ventilator or respirator and in an induced coma. The good thing that I can see in your situation is that at least your husband is off the ventilator, and it sounds to me like he's able to stay off the ventilator, which is a very good thing and is probably also more important than the confusion, agitation and non-cooperation. The last thing you would want is to have your husband go back on a ventilator. In regards to your loved one getting strong medication or the antipsychosis medication to manage his confusion, agitation and non-cooperation, you need to know a few things. My experience has shown that intensive care teams tend to be very quick in giving those behavioral drugs like the antipsychosis medications in order to manage your loved one. I am personally not a huge friend of those drugs. However, I'm also aware of the limitations of non-medication management if patients are confused, agitated and non-cooperative. Therefore, if the intensive care team has tried to manage your husband with their communication skills and their expertise and have failed, their next step is to give him antipsychotic drugs such as haloperidol, clonidine, olanzapine or diazepam, which is Valium, to only name a few. The problem often is that by giving those drugs that your husband gets knocked out, so to speak, and very sleepy, to the point where the situation may actually get worse before it actually gets better. There is also the risk of your husband getting too sleepy, so that he would have to be put back on a ventilator or a respirator again. Normally, as a first step after the induced coma, it's very important that the intensive care team gets your husband into a normal routine, and I have found that it's very important to take good care of your husband's hygiene needs, such as brushing teeth and doing regular mouth care, but also things like regular washes and a shower can do wonders and is often the better path compared to managing the situation with drugs. Do you think that your husband is getting good nursing care? Also, think about things like getting some natural daylight if he's in a room without natural daylight. Do you think that the intensive care team has considered any of it? If you find that they have, that's great. And if you find that they haven't, just ask for it and don't be shy about it. You also mentioned that your husband has lost appetite, which is nothing unusual in intensive care. However, is the intensive care team giving him some nutrition via a feeding tube or intravenously? Have they considered this? Also, if he likes any specific food, bring it in and give it to him. Nutrition can help as well, especially if he is weak. Sometimes, however, even good nursing care might not help, and then medication management with antipsychosis meds might be indicated, but it should be the last resort. If you find that all other attempts to manage the situation have failed, then medication management is the right thing to do, and your patience will be tested. Normally, it takes a good few days until your husband will be normal and cooperative again. Very rarely have I seen confusion, agitation and non-cooperation seen last for longer than 7 days. However, those 7 days can be a test to your patience, of course. Other things you can do are things like playing his favorite music, bring pictures of your loved ones, familiar tastes, smells, etc. might also help to get your husband back to normal. Also, check out this blog post here to give you more insight about confusion, agitation and delirium in intensive care. You can click on the link below this video to the blog post 5 things you need to know if your critically ill loved one is confused, agitated and delirious in intensive care. I hope that this helps, and please let me know if you have any other questions. I would also be available to have a chat on Skype if you need more help. You also should get more education about intensive care, as otherwise the intensive care team will put their agenda on you and your critically ill loved one, and you wind up with no control, power and influence. How can you leverage your level of power, influence and control whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You'll get to that all-important feeling of power, control and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to get real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Our free reports help you with in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is dying in intensive care. sign up for your free membership and download your free Instant Impact Report now. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you'll also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 killer tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to control, power and influence in your situation. You will get crucial behind the scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.